Hey there. Tonight, we're traveling back, way back. Not to some dark medieval hut with drafty walls and a goat stealing your bed, but to something older, more chaotic, more fragrant. Rome. Not the polished statues or triumphant Caesars from your history textbook. No, we're going to the marketplace, the beating, sweating, shouting heart of the Roman Empire. Before we get started, take a moment to dim your lights, turn on a fan for that soft white noise, and, if you're feeling especially immersive, light something mildly pungent. Maybe a slice of fish. Just kidding, don't do that. Your neighbors will call someone. But do settle in, because what you're about to hear isn't just about shopping lists. It's about status, survival, and why sometimes a headless chicken could cost more than a bottle of perfume. If you enjoy this kind of content, take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a little mind-blowing to see who's out there, whether it's 11 p.m. in Toronto or 4 a.m. in Tokyo. Ready? Now, picture this. The year is 120 CE. Emperor Hadrian is busy redesigning cities, getting suspiciously close to his architect, and building a wall in Britain to keep out the angry neighbors. You're just a regular Roman citizen, let's say middle class. You live in a cramped insula, the Roman version of an apartment complex, where your ceiling leaks wine if the upstairs tenant throws a wild Bacchus party, which is often. But today is market day, and you've got coins jingling in your pouch, a loose list in your head, and one singular mission: survive the chaos of the forum. Let's talk about that chaos. The Roman marketplace, especially the open-air forum, wasn't just a place to buy onions and argue about peach prices. It was a total sensory overload. Think farmer's market meets political rally meets mildly illegal cockfight, all covered in a fine mist of sweat, olive oil, and regret. Merchants shouted over each other, "Fresh garum, 1 amphora, and your neighbor will think they're a senator." Musicians played flutes badly, while toddlers tried to steal dates from unattended carts. Someone's donkey relieved itself near the fishmonger, who politely ignored it and kept haggling over a particularly moody mackerel. And you're already regretting not wearing your sandals with the thicker soles. But let's get to it. What could you actually buy? First up, garum. Ah, yes, garum. The Roman answer to, what if we made everything taste like fermented fish and eternal salt? This sauce, made by letting fish guts rot in the sun until they became a salty brown liquid, was the backbone of Roman cuisine. Think of it as Roman ketchup, if ketchup had the consistency of regret and the scent of low tide. You could buy the cheap stuff, which was mostly fish sludge scraped from barrels, or you could splurge on the premium stuff, filtered, aged, and stored in sealed amphoras. The difference was night and day. One made your stew savory, the other gave you an involuntary gag reflex. Still, everyone used it. Rich, poor, legionnaire, senator. Even slaves got a drizzle on their lentils if it was a festival day. And yes, it was expensive. So much so that some Roman households locked it up like a bottle of aged wine. Next on your list, bread. But hold on. This isn't your standard baguette in a paper bag moment. Bread was a political weapon in Rome. Literally. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses, was how the empire kept the people happy. Cheap grain, subsidized loaves, and free entertainment to keep the mob from remembering they didn't have running water or voting rights. If you had some cash, you could choose from a selection of breads. The panis plebeius, a basic barley loaf for the working class. The panis silagenius, made from refined wheat for the snooty elite. And if you are feeling especially Roman, you could buy a panis militarius, a hard, dense loaf designed for soldiers and masochists. Vendors carried bread in baskets or stacked them like bricks, and you'd better inspect before buying. Some loaves came with bonus rocks baked inside, courtesy of inattentive bakers or crumbling ovens. And yes, You could sue a baker for a broken tooth. Rome had laws for that. Now let's wander over to the fruit stalls. Fruit. The Roman elite loved a good fig the way we love overpriced lattes. Figs, dates, apples, pears, they were everywhere. Some imported from as far as Syria or Egypt, others grown locally in Campania, where the volcanic soil made everything taste better and occasionally explode. If you were rich, you bought fresh pomegranates in winter when no one else could. If you were poor, you picked up dried figs in a basket wrapped in old cloth and hoped no one noticed the worm nibble. Prices changed with the seasons. One week an apple cost a few asses. Yes, that's what their coins were called. The next week after a storm wrecked the orchard, the price doubled. Fun fact, some Romans paid their taxes in fruit. Others bribed officials with honey-soaked dates. A little citrus went a long way in the Senate. Let's slide over to the meat stall. If you're vegan, now's a great time to visualize a nice oatcake and tune out the next bit. Meat was rare, special, pricey. Poor Romans mostly ate grains and legumes, but when they did splurge, they bought whatever was cheapest and still vaguely moved. You could get goat, pork, chicken, or sometimes dormice. Yes, that's a real thing. The elite loved dormice. They fattened them in special jars and roasted them with poppy seeds and honey. You, however, can afford a chicken leg and maybe a few mystery cuts labeled "not hoof." You hand over a few sesterces and try not to think too hard about what you're buying. The stall smells like ambition and slightly old fat. And let's not forget, the butcher is casually smoking dried celery stalks while cutting meat with a knife that looks older than Julius Caesar. For protein on a budget, you buy lupini beans, soak them at home, and tell yourself it's basically steak. And of course, there's cheese. Romans adored cheese. Aged sheep cheese, creamy soft curds, smoky hard wheels transported in wax. You could buy it crumbly, pungent, sour, or aged in a cave and possibly alive. The poor got simple, salty stuff. The rich, imported Greek cheese sealed in clay pots, perfumed with herbs and costing more than a slave's monthly wages. You taste a sample from a vendor wearing a stained tunic and missing 3 teeth. It's sharp, maybe too sharp. You smile and nod politely. Behind you, someone is arguing loudly about the price of a goat bladder. A child drops a fish. A senator walks by, pretending not to see the whole mess. Welcome to the Roman market. You've only been here an hour, and you're already down 5 coins, a chunk of dignity, and your will to argue with vendors. But you're not done yet.
So, you've made it past the fish guts and fig sellers. You've dodged 2 pickpockets, a stampede of goats, and an aggressively persuasive date merchant who swore his fruit cured gout and heartbreak. But your shopping list isn't finished. Now you need wine. And in ancient Rome, that's not just a preference, it's survival. Let's be clear, Romans didn't drink water. Not because they were too good for it, but because untreated water often led to stomach-turning results. So they drank wine. Everyone drank wine. Men, women, children, slaves. It was thinner than modern wine, often diluted with water, spiced with herbs, or, if you hated yourself, sweetened with lead. Yes, lead. The Romans, in their infinite innovation, discovered that boiling wine in lead pots gave it a delightful sweet aftertaste. What they didn't realize, it was also slowly turning their brains into mush. But hey, worth it for that smooth finish, right? If you were well off, you'd pick up Falernian wine from Campania, the ancient equivalent of a $500 bottle with too much branding. Stored in elegant amphorae, sealed with pitch and marked with vintage years. Romans were obsessed with vintages. They didn't have Yelp, but they did know which year the grapes tasted like ambrosia and which year tasted like goat sweat. If you were poor, you bought Laura. Laura was made from grape skins, seeds, and stems that had already been pressed once. Then they were soaked again in water and fermented into a beverage, technically. It had the color of dirty bathwater and the aroma of mild despair. But it was cheap, and after 2 cups, you didn't care. Next up, cosmetics, because Romans didn't just drink wine, they wanted to look good doing it. The average Roman market had a section dedicated to ungentarii, cosmetics vendors. These stalls were tiny altars to beauty, body odor, and the fine line between allure and arsenic poisoning. There were creams made from crushed rose petals and oils scented with spikenard, beeswax balms for cracked skin, pumice stones for exfoliating, and makeup made with, wait for it, lead, chalk, and crocodile dung. Let's unpack that. Roman women and some men applied white lead paste to their faces to achieve that classic pale, ghost-of-your-own-liver complexion. Cheeks were tinted with red ochre or crushed mulberries. Eyeliner made with charcoal or antimony, which is as toxic as it sounds. And for perfume, you could pick up imported frankincense or civet oil made from the glands of a wildcat. Spritz yourself with that and congratulations, you now smell like divinity and mild panic. Of course, luxury had a price. Imported Egyptian kohl eyeliner could cost more than a pig, and in some circles, showing up to a dinner party without perfume was like showing up naked and humming off-key. But not everything in the market was legal or pretty. Let's wander to a darker corner, the alley behind the olive merchant's stall, near the guy with suspicious eels and even more suspicious pricing. This is where you found the whisper vendors. They didn't yell. They didn't hold signs. They didn't have stalls with umbrellas made from dyed cloth. They stood quietly, eyes flicking side to side, and if you looked like the right kind of customer, they'd say, "Interested in something special?" And you might be, because behind the respectable market lay the black market. And in ancient Rome, the line between the two was fuzzy at best. You could buy fake citizenship papers, love potions, 50% herbs, 50% snake oil, 100% placebo, stolen military gear, because who doesn't want a gently used gladius? Cursed tablets? Yes, tiny lead scrolls inscribed with hexes, often rolled and nailed into the floorboards of rivals' homes. One particularly lucrative item was stolen tomb goods. Yeah. Romans loved grave robbing, not for the moral thrill, but because funerals were expensive and tombs often contained rings, coins, or even whole outfits. If you were caught, fines, prison, public shame. If you weren't, congratulations! You're now the proud owner of a tunic last worn by a guy named Lucius who died of very suspicious causes. Back to the main street. Time to shop for spices. Now this was where the real money went. Rome was the final stop on a long, winding trade route that stretched from India to the Middle East to Egypt and finally the ports of Ostia, which meant spices were exotic, rare, and stupidly expensive. Pepper from India? A small pouch could buy you a cow. Cinnamon? Mostly bark, but people bought it anyway. Saffron? Worth more than its weight in silver. Rich Romans sprinkled it on everything – meats, wine, even on their guests. Yes, actual petals tossed from above during dinner parties like someone exploded a luxury poopery bomb over your plate. Of flamingo tongue. Poor Romans? They sniffed the spice stall, sighed, and bought coriander seeds. But hey, dream big. Next, you pass the linen vendors. Clothing in Rome was more than fashion. It was status code. A tunic? Everyday wear. A toga? Only for citizens. A toga praetexta, purple-trimmed, worn by magistrates or young aristocrats. A fully purple toga? Reserved for emperors and the deeply delusional. In the market, You could buy undyed linen tunics by the basket, or splurge on something imported from Gaul dyed with rare plants or shellfish. Yes, shellfish. The Tyrian purple dye was made by crushing thousands of murex snails. It smelled awful, cost a fortune, and was worn mostly by people who could afford not to care what they smelled like. But the most affordable clothing item was used sandals. Yes, you could buy second-hand footwear, complete with toe prints, mystery stains, and the faint smell of ambition. And now, you remember, you're supposed to buy a gift. Because your neighbor helped you repair your roof last week, and Roman social etiquette requires reciprocity. You duck into a stall selling glassware. Not the stuff from Alexandria, that's for aristocrats, but local blown glass, cups, beads, bottles shaped like dolphins or pine cones. Fragile, colorful, slightly wobbly, perfect for saying, "I appreciate your labor, but not enough to bankrupt myself." You pay in sestertii, nod to the vendor, and wrap it in a scrap of cloth. As you head toward the forum's edge, your bag is heavier, your coin pouch lighter, and your feet, let's be honest, absolutely ruined. But you're not done yet.
So, you've got your garum, your goat cheese, your jug of headache in a wine amphora, and a charming glass cup that may or may not survive the walk home. But something's missing. Ah, yes, livestock, and perhaps a person. Let's start with the animals. Because in ancient Rome, a trip to the market wasn't complete without the sound of a squealing pig, a braying mule, and someone loudly insisting that the chicken they're selling is definitely not haunted. The Macellum, Rome's indoor market complex, often had a section dedicated entirely to animals. Not just meat, but live ones. Chickens in wicker baskets, ducks tied together at the legs, pigs dragging reluctant merchants into a pile of lentils, and occasionally flamingos. Yes, actual flamingos. Not because they were good pets, have you ever tried to bathe a flamingo? But because wealthy Romans ate them, specifically their tongues. Roasted, seasoned, and served as a delicacy at dinner parties designed to impress and horrify guests in equal measure. If you were shopping for a banquet, you might pick up one plump chicken, standard, reliable, smells like dignity, 2 doves, symbolic, poetic, not filling, 1 peacock, dramatic, impractical, delicious if you ignore the feathers, 1 flamingo, expensive, obnoxious, very on brand for Roman elite. And let's not forget the snails. Yes, Romans had snail farms. They fattened them with wine and milk until they were the ancient equivalent of fancy escargot. In the market, snails were sold in little clay pots, alive, sleepy, and entirely unaware they were headed for a sizzling pan of regret. Now, let's talk slaves, because no Roman market was complete without a slave trader's stall, usually marked by a wooden platform and a line of people chained or roped together. It was as normal to a Roman as a food truck is to us. Common, unquestioned, and disturbingly efficient. Slaves were sold with placards around their necks listing key features. Greek, literate, knows poetry, slight limp but plays the lyre, excellent teeth, Numidian, strong, farmer, speaks only 2 words, yes and where, Gaul, unruly, will fight a lion for a snack, discount available, prices varied wildly, a strong farmhand, affordable, a skilled Greek scribe, pricey, a beautiful young servant trained in flute and flattery, astronomical. And yes, you could buy a philosopher. No, really. Greek philosophers, fallen on hard times or captured during wars, were sometimes sold into slavery. Wealthy Romans loved to buy them and keep them as status symbols. Nothing says, "I'm cultured," like owning your own Socrates. Bring me my toga and also an existential crisis, please.
If you couldn't afford a whole philosopher, you might settle for a tutor, a cook, or a doorkeeper trained to look judgmental. Some slave dealers offered warranties. If your slave turned out to be ill, violent, or dramatically worse than advertised, you had 6 months to return them. Ancient Rome, where even human lives came with a refund policy. Disturbed? You should be. It was a brutal system. Slaves had no rights, no protections, and no escape unless freed by their masters. Some lived decent lives in wealthy homes. Others didn't. The market didn't care. It just listed the price. Let's step away from that corner and breathe. Time to look at household goods. The Roman version of Target, but louder and with more eels. You could buy bronze lamps shaped like satyrs, dolphins, or uncomfortably naked gods. Ceramic bowls, often stamped with crude jokes or bits of poetry like, "Drink up, forget your wife." Brooms, made from bundled twigs and dreams. Chamber pots, that came in all sizes, including travel size. And if you were rich, you bought silverware. Not just forks and spoons, which weren't common yet, but fancy ladles, fish knives, and drinking cups shaped like boars. Bonus points if your goblet had a hidden compartment for wine mixed with herbs and mild sedatives. Romans liked a good buzz. One popular item? Dice. Made of bone, ivory, or carved stone, dice games were everywhere. Legal? Technically, no. But if you whispered the right name and slipped a coin to the right guard, you could gamble in peace, at least until your mother-in-law walked by and scolded you into the next era. Feeling tired? Good, because next up, sleeping gear. The Roman version of Target, but louder and with more eels. You could buy bronze lamps shaped like satyrs, dolphins, or uncomfortably naked gods. Ceramic bowls, often stamped with crude jokes or bits of poetry like, "Drink up, forget your wife."
You're almost done. Your coin pouch is an echo of its former self. Your arms are full. You smell like goat cheese and ambition. But you're not heading home just yet. Because no Roman shopping day ended without a stop at the baths. Now, before you picture a quiet spa with essential oils and whale music, let's adjust your expectations. Roman baths were less relaxing retreat and more public gym meets hot tub meets social media with better acoustics. The thermae were enormous public bathhouses, massive stone complexes with heated floors, soaring ceilings, and enough steam to make your eyebrows reconsider their existence. You stow your groceries in a cubby, strip down, because yes, it was mostly nude, and step into a world of sweat, politics, and bad flute music. Let's take a quick tour. Apoditarium, the changing room, full of attendants, lost sandals, and arguments about tunic theft. Tepidarium, warm room, great acoustics, ideal for humble bragging about your nephew the senator. Caldidarium, hot room, so steamy you could poach a fish in your toga folds. Frigidarium, cold plunge, where egos and body heat go to die. The baths weren't just for washing. They were for networking. Need a loan? Ask in the Caldidarium. Want to sell your cousin's farm? Mention it during a back scrub. Looking to arrange a marriage, bribe a judge, or plan a poetry reading? There's a bath for that. Vendors even worked the perimeter. Boys sold scrapers, strigils, olive oil, and scented soaps made from lard, lime, and wishful thinking. One clever merchant offered guaranteed beauty in 3 scrapes or less. It didn't work, but he yelled it so confidently that people bought it anyway. Now, clean-ish, you dress and return to the forum. And that's when you hear it. Gossip. Romans lived for it. There were no tabloids, no Twitter threads, but the marketplace had its own news network, powered entirely by old women, drunk poets, and that one olive vendor who had seen things. Today's headlines? Did you hear about Julia the Younger? Pregnant again. Not sure who the father is. Again. A senator was caught trying to pass off Syrian glass as Egyptian. Tragic, really. Someone swore they saw Hadrian himself buying a tunic with holes. Can you imagine? Holes!
But it wasn't all slander and fashion faux pas. Markets were also where you learned real news. Trade routes, grain shortages, which roads were safe, which provinces were revolting again. And sometimes vendors themselves dropped hints. The olive seller, let's call him Marcus, leans in and whispers, "Don't buy from Publius today. His olives were pickled in vinegar meant for cleaning marble." You nod gravely and slide your basket a little farther from Publius's stall. Marcus, of course, adds, "Mine were soaked in seawater from the Bay of Naples, blessed by dolphins, practically sacred." You buy a jar. You don't believe a word of it. Let's talk haggling. In the Roman market, prices were suggestions, not laws, and every transaction was a verbal dance, flattery, insults, and dramatic sighs included. You? 3 sesterces, you wound me. Vendor, this was made by the gods themselves. You? I'll give you 1. Vendor, may your figs rot in their basket. You? 2? Vendor, done, but I'll tell Jupiter what you did. It was half theater, half commerce, and oddly satisfying. But haggling wasn't for everyone. Some Romans, especially the wealthy, sent slaves or freedmen to shop on their behalf. Less hassle, less haggling, fewer emotional wounds from being called cheapskate scum by a cabbage dealer. For those shopping in person, reputation mattered. Vendors remembered faces. If you were kind, they might give you a better cut of meat. If you once argued over the price of a fig, they might accidentally sell you goat cheese 3 days past the point of salvation. Speaking of food, let's talk snacks. Because all that walking and shouting builds up an appetite, and the Roman market had options. Thermopolia, ancient fast food stalls with hot dishes ready to go. Beans, stews, meat skewers, basically the Chipotle of the 2nd century, minus the rice options. Honeyed pastries, fried dough drenched in honey and sesame, sticky, glorious, and sold by shouting boys with trays balanced on their heads. Roasted chickpeas, the OG street snack, crunchy, salty, and cheap. Wine and water stands, not as fun as they sound, but it was technically hydrating. If you were feeling brave, you could try street oysters. Fresh? Maybe. Deadly? Occasionally. Memorable? Always. Now let's wander past the bookseller's corner. Romans loved books. Well, scrolls, technically. Bound books, codices, wouldn't become popular until a bit later. But even in this era, literacy was hot. You could buy scrolls of Virgil, Ovid, or Seneca. Dirty poems by Catullus, copied by a scribe blushing the whole time. Stoic philosophy, for those hoping to look wise while screaming at their slaves. Prices varied. Some scrolls were wax copies, others were ink on parchment or papyrus, and if you wanted a scroll custom copied, you paid by the line. Scribes sat hunched in corners, ink-stained and weary, muttering things like, "If one more person asks for Marcus Aurelius but shorter, I swear I'll snap this stylus." Let's stop for a moment. You're tired. You've walked 3 miles, bought a week's worth of food, and been emotionally wounded by a man with 3 teeth and a terrifying mastery of produce pricing. But there's one last thing to buy. Amulets. The superstitious soul of Rome. You see them hanging from cords, laid out on cloths, strung on sticks. Phallic charms for luck and fertility. Eyes of Horus, imported from Egypt. Miniature Hercules clubs for strength. Carved hands doing rude gestures to ward off evil. Yes, really. Everyone wore one, from senators to beggars to that one guy yelling about turnips again. You pick out a tiny bronze key, said to unlock the favor of Mercury, the god of commerce and travelers. You pay the vendor, slip it into your pouch, and hope it works better than your last one, which you're pretty sure attracted wasps. As the sun starts to thin, the market begins to thin. Vendors pack up. Slaves carry leftovers home. Kids chase each other with half-eaten dates. You walk slowly, exhausted, but alive in the way only a chaotic market day can make you feel. But before you leave, one last voice calls out. "Hey, stranger, want to hear your future?"
The sun is setting. Shadows stretch across the marble paving stones. The last rays of light hit the domes and columns with a golden glow, as if the gods themselves are giving the market one final inspection. But you're still here, because someone just offered to tell your future. You pause, half curious, half aware this could end in either spiritual revelation or a missing wallet. The fortune teller is an old woman, draped in a patchwork of fabrics that smell like incense, mint leaves, and possibly goat. Her eyes are cloudy, but her hands are quick. She gestures for you to sit on a crate of figs. Very prophetic. She pulls out a sack of bones, animal knuckles mostly, and tosses them into a bronze bowl. They clatter like truth, landing in slow motion. She mutters under her breath. Something about Jupiter, something about travel, something about avoiding lentils on Thursdays. She says, "You'll be wealthy, but only when you learn to stop buying spoiled cheese." Then she smiles, extends her hand, and you drop in 2 coins. Worth it? Hard to say. But now you're curious. What else could you find in this strange, half-mystical corner of the Forum? The magic section of the Roman market wasn't on the map, but it was always there, hidden in back alleys, behind more respectable stalls, or under cloth tents that smelled suspiciously like burnt thyme. Here you could buy curse tablets again, this time customized. Just give the scribe a name, a crime, and your preferred divine punishment. Love charms, usually herbs tied with red string and a whispered promise to Venus. Protective spells, inscribed on lead, then folded and worn in a leather pouch. Moon water. Yes, water allegedly collected under a full moon and blessed by a priestess who may or may not be your olive vendor in disguise. And then, of course, there were the fake priests. They'd pop up, chant a few lines of poorly remembered Latin, and sell you a rock they claimed was touched by Apollo himself. You buy one. Why not? It sparkles. And it makes a nice paperweight for the scroll you also bought titled, "How to Charm Women with Cicero's Speeches." Let's get serious for a moment, because Rome wasn't all laughs and sausages. The market was also full of crime. Pickpockets roamed like wolves, especially near the baths where half-dressed Romans forgot to clutch their money pouches. Some thieves were children, fast, small, uncatchable. Others worked in teams, one creating the distraction while the other liberated your coins. Vendors got robbed too. There were fights over fake weights, spoiled goods, and once, according to Pliny, a duel over mislabeled anchovy paste. You could report theft to the urban cohort, Rome's market police, but only if you were a citizen. If you weren't, tough luck. Some merchants took justice into their own hands. It wasn't uncommon to see a thief tied to a post, publicly shamed with a sign that read, "I took a sausage I did not pay for." Romans loved public humiliation almost as much as they loved fermented fish sauce. Now, let's talk about the weirdest things you could buy in the Roman market. These are all real. We wish they weren't. Powdered mouse skulls for toothaches, crushed beetles for mascara, mummified crocodile parts for fertility, flamingo tongue, yes, again, goat bile, sold as a health tonic, a live leopard, if you had connections and 0 cents. One emperor even bought a giant turnip the size of a wine jug just to parade it around and declare, "Rome is abundant." The market applauded. Probably. By now your bag is full. Let's take inventory. What you bought today. 1 amphora of mid-tier garum, fish sauce. 1 loaf of military-style bread. 3 figs, 2 edible, 1 decorative. A sliver of goat cheese. 1 cup of Laura, questionable wine. A tiny jar of lead-based face powder. A slightly cursed scroll of poetry. a suspiciously shiny amulet, a haggled-for glass cup, one fortune-teller's prophecy, a stone blessed by Apollo, citation needed, a receipt scribbled by a vendor on the back of an expired temple donation slip. Total cost, approximately 37 sesterti, a bit of your soul, and all of your patience. You walk home, through crowded streets, past temples, fountains, and that one graffiti wall that always says something new. Today it reads, Livia loves Gaius. Gaius loves his own reflection. Classic Gaius. You reach your insula, climb 4 flights of cracked stairs, step over a sleeping neighbor, and collapse into your bed of straw and dreams. You exhale and realize something strange. You just time traveled. Not through a machine, not through a wormhole, but through things, smells, prices, sounds, the little details that built Rome, not in stone, but in noise and need and human chaos. You saw what they bought, and through that, you saw who they were. Rich or poor, free or enslaved, dreamers, hustlers, philosophers, frauds, all gathered in one sweaty, holy, ridiculous place to buy a better tomorrow, or at least a fresher chicken.